Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us here on the Egora Experience program. I am your host, Cezary Jurewicz. Today I have with me Taras Hryniw from the
Hello.
great nation of USA, just like myself. Now, Taras is a business owner, a commercial airline pilot, and one of the founding members of the International Logic Party. Please tell us a few more words about yourself, Taras.
Yeah. I do a number of diverse things. My primary stuff is I own a web development company. It's what takes up the vast majority of my time. I kind of almost got a side gig as an airline pilot. It's something I've been
Nice.
for forever. I mostly do it for the travel benefits because I enjoy that. It's fun to fly the jet. Once or twice a month. But yeah, I'm primarily got my web design company. Busy with that and. Uh, uh, Caesar actually knocked on my door once, and that's how we met. Um,
Crazy
first,
story.
I kind of blew him off because I thought he was here. I thought he was either here to sell me some cheap electricity or help me find God, one or the other. But after briefly talking with him, it was neither. So then I was intrigued by what he had to say. Um, I learned about the International Logic Party and it's the whole stock market of ideas that is Egora, and I thought it's a good idea, and that's why I got involved.
Yeah, you've been with us since the beginning. It's been a hell of a ride. I really appreciate you being a part of it and contributing as you have. Um, all right, let's keep going. For those of you who are new, let me tell you real quick what we do here. The International Logic Party has built a new kind of networking platform. It's called Egora, and it actually makes politics rational, efficient, and incorruptible. This thing actually gives ordinary citizens like us real political power. Through Egora, we can make our governments do what we, the people, want them to do. Now, on this show, we will be using the Egora to discuss some political issues and ideas, and we want you to participate with us. So please register for Egora. The link is in the video description. Then search both myself and my guest Taras. And then, as we're having our discussion, you'll be able to vote on our ideas by including them into your ideological profile if you wish to support those ideas. But the point is that here your voice has real power, and we want to hear you speak. Okay, Taras, let's get started. We're going to discuss two ideas in the Agora, one from me and one from you, and we will try to get each other to support those ideas. I will go first to start things off, and then you will go second for a strong finish. So let me pull up an idea here. Um, I think what I want to discuss with you is some economics. This is to me
Okay.
this is a really fascinating topic, and I know that we agree on a previous version of this idea, and this idea has been developed since the last meeting. I'd like to run this idea by you. The text of this idea, we're going to put that in the video description so that people can follow along with it. But okay, the first section is something that they actually agreed on, but let me still run this by you. The introduction: fairness and economics, government and fairness, government and economics. Section 1. The market system is the only method for a society to relate the value of goods that make life possible, such as food, to goods that make life enjoyable, such as art, in a way that is fair to the preferences of everyone. Thus, the market system should be the basis of any economy. You agree with me on this so far, right, Taras?
Yes, I do.
Okay, so this idea keeps going because, like I said, we've developed this. And section 2 is the government should not play any role in influencing the behavior of market participants by favoring anyone through subsidies, price controls, barriers to entry, or taxes, except those that are necessary for strategic interest of national defense, establishing minimum standards of consumer safety, and accounting for externalities. What do you think about that, Taras? Is that agreeable to you?
I mean, it's a little too vague for my tastes. I'm very much so a free market guy. Businesses should be able to start up, choose what products they want to sell, price in their own products, and if another guy comes up, a competitor who does it better, then the original business either needs to step up their game or go out of business. They shouldn't be artificially propped up by things like protectionary trade practices or something like that. I mean, one thing that for the most part I'm against is tariffs. I definitely believe in an open economy and free trade. I really when it comes to trade wars, um, I'm a believer in the statement that in trade wars you have no winners, only
Yeah.
losers. Both parties lose. Um, it's
Well, except for some inefficient businesses. Those are the
Yeah,
ones that
because the
still.
thing with inefficient businesses is inefficient businesses shouldn't be protected by things like tariffs.
Yeah.
They need to, the thing is, and I appreciate this as a business owner. When you're making money as a business owner and you got a system that's profitable, the last thing you want to do is rock the boat. You don't want that system to change. If you got some new upstart company, here, um, if you got some upstart company coming in and doing things differently, then it's easier for you as a business to start going to the government and crying, "Oh my God, they're not being fair. We need this and we need that," than adapting your business practices to compete with this new upstart company that's doing it, a newer and better way. Um, you
Well,
know,
wait, hold on a second. I don't know if I really quite got that. So, would you have a new upstart company? They're doing things differently, but you're saying they're getting favoritism from the government, or
Well,
is
here's a
that?
great example. Look at SpaceX. Look at what SpaceX has done with the rocket launch industry. It's revolutionized the rocket launch industry. But for national security launches, which are pretty much managed by the government, it was very difficult for SpaceX to crack into that market and get approved to do national security launches. Um, I need to check the facts, but I think SpaceX got denied and they had to file an appeal and all this stuff because United Launch Alliance, which is the old company that runs Delta, Delta and Atlas rockets, that does all these national security space launches. They're very threatened by SpaceX and SpaceX's business model. And there's been a lot of them going to the part of the government, and it's all sorts of things. Like in the space industry and the launch industry, a lot of it is, the old companies are so inefficient, and it's because you have congressmen, which they want to protect jobs in their districts. When a space company goes to congressmen, they say, well, NASA needs to give us this business, or the Air Force needs to give us this business because we have jobs in your district, and without this business, those jobs will go away. And I feel for the people and and the jobs in the district, but it's an inefficient business model. They need to become more efficient. Here you go, look at SpaceX.
Just to clarify, you mean when the companies are being protected by the government with these
Yeah,
different? Yeah.
exactly. The companies are being protected by the government, and um, we're wasting our taxpayer dollars. I mean, look at SpaceX. SpaceX does exactly what they do, and they do it for way cheaper than
Yeah.
the legacy launch companies. And the industry is very threatened, by SpaceX, and now only the industry is looking to adopt because this whole thing with reusable rockets that Elon Musk pioneered. People in the launch industry were laughing at him. They're like, "This can never happen." And it's like,
Yeah.
no, it's because they don't want to develop reusable rockets. It's not that it can't happen, it's they don't want to do it. And it's easier for them to put bureaucratic obstacles on behalf of SpaceX. And see, stuff like that, I'm totally against stuff like that. That is an excellent example of, unfair protectionism.
But see, in this section of this idea, that's the point that we're trying to get at, is that there are these mechanisms that are in place, and we are, and actually, if you could look at this idea with me, if you could pull up my ideological profile, this is in that 20-point
Yeah, I see.
position, and so we are talking about, like, I think maybe there are other mechanisms that we missed here, but so we're talking about subsidies, price controls, and price controls, we're talking, that's actually not so much, I think, related to the examples that you gave. I'm thinking of price controls like minimum wage or like what is it, price ceilings like in New York City, things like that. Barriers to entry like, unnecessary licenses or something, or a limit to how many practitioners can be in a certain field. Or, well, taxes. There are many different kind of tax tools that can be implemented to, well, to favor some businesses versus others. So we're trying to get these, these mechanisms that are being used to favor some businesses over others. We're trying to get that out there in this section of this idea, so that people are aware of these different mechanisms that are being used to manipulate the market to protect the inefficient companies. But except for certain industries that might be um, necessary for strategic national defense. And again, that's a lot to discuss there. But so I'm just wondering if this section of this idea, if you think that should include anything else, or is there
Well, see,
something that's missing for
it's
you?
too vague for me because this is a very complicated issue. This is a very complicated issue. Um, it's like, I mean, something like minimum wage laws. Like, I'll be honest with you, I don't understand minimum wage. Like, I see the argument on both sides. Like, you should raise the minimum wage or you should not raise the minimum wage. But I don't understand enough about that. I feel to really be able to, to talk intelligently, about something like minimum wage laws. I mean, something that I do feel is, uh, you, you know, in Chicago, for example, everything in Chicago is incredibly union dominated. Especially if you're talking about any of the trades, plumbing, electrician, construction. Um, Chicago's finally updating some of its building code, but a great example is, a lot of Chicago's building code is so archaic and stuff that you can't do this, you can't use that, and
Hmm.
it's kept archaic because the trade unions want to make sure that they have more work. You
Yeah,
know,
yeah.
they're coming in. That right there is a great example of something that I'm wholeheartedly opposed to.
Well,
I,
that'll be like one of the barriers to entry that.
right, right. It's like unnecessary building code, stuff like that. Um, it's but on the other hand, you can't completely forego government regulation either. I mean, the best point I can think of to argue this is environmental laws and climate change. I mean, there's
Well,
there's no single company, no matter how, even the biggest companies out there, there's no single company that is big enough that it alone has an impact on the environment. It's all of these different companies. But because no single company has an impact that's big enough, no single company has the proper motivation, to reduce their carbon footprint,
yeah.
to, reduce their pollution output and stuff like that. And that's a great example of where the government does need to step in and regulate things because the market cannot regulate itself. If everybody is playing under the same pollution controls, if everybody's playing under the same carbon, controls and stuff, now it's a level playing field amongst all the players.
That's an interesting point because in a sense, like, environmental regulation does influence market behavior, but it does influence everyone equally, or at least it should be designed that way. So um, if there's some companies that are putting carbon into the atmosphere,
Well, but
that
see,
these laws are.
but the problem with environmental regulations is it should influence everybody equally, but it doesn't and it can't because fundamentally you have energy companies. And when you have energy companies, they could be, coal mining companies, they could be oil companies, their livelihood right there depends on extracting carbon out of the ground and pumping it into the atmosphere. And anytime you're talking about something that is, reducing carbon emissions, that's directly going after these companies. I mean,
Well, right, but that's a different kind of thing. I mean, it's really because the reason why we do regulate that is to impose costs on them that they should actually have, that they're should already be paying, which they're not. So it's a different kind of thing. Like here we're talking about, like, the point of this idea is more like, is if you have a tomato farmer and a cucumber farmer, you shouldn't be charging 5% tax on tomatoes and 10 on cucumbers just because, well, I don't know,
I agree. I agree with you. I agree with you in that aspect. In that analogy. But it's when you get into the real world, it's a lot dirtier. I mean, look at airlines, for example. You could say, well, okay, let's say you impose, a carbon fee for a passenger ticket carbon fee. Well, um, if you could say, well, it's fair because if every airline passenger traveling out of Chicago O'Hare gets a $10 carbon tax added onto the price of their ticket, then it's fair because everybody's airline tickets are going to raise. But then, you could have airlines saying, well, that's going to decrease our demand, and it's going to be bad for us because it's decreasing demand. So that's another concern right there. That even if it is a level playing field, because again, you impose a $10 tax on everybody, every airline's charging it. But if it decreases demand, it hurts the industry as a result. So it's a lot
Well,
more.
the point is that the industry shouldn't maybe be so big in the first place. And actually, if we're talking about subsidies, I mean, you'd know a lot more about this. You're an airline pilot, but actually, I think the airline industry is heavily subsidized by the
Well,
government.
it is and it isn't because in terms of international flying is still very it's international flying is still very regulated. Like if a company wants to start an international route, um, they could be offered a subsidy by a government on it. They have to apply for slots. Like if somebody wants to start flying from um, let's say I'm trying to think of some place that doesn't have like a airline service right now, or like okay, say I know U.S. to India, right? There's, I believe, I'm not positive. I think United is the only airline that has nonstop service from the U.S. The only U.S. airline. Air India does too, but I think United is the only U.S. airline that has service nonstop from the U.S. to India. If American Airlines wants to start flying to India, they can't just go, oh, I'm going to start a flight to New Delhi next month, and that's it. They have to get approval from the Indian government and the U.S. government to do that. And once they get that approval, they have to fly that route. Let's say it turns out to be not profitable, and they pull out of it. Well, they can't hold that slot open. If they don't use it, they're going to lose it. Whereas, let's say American wants to start flying to, I don't know, some route they probably don't do, like let's say they want to start flying to South Bend, Indiana. I don't think American flies to South Bend, Indiana right now. Let's say they want to go from O'Hare to South Bend, Indiana. South Bend, Indiana, as long as they got an extra gate at the airport, they say, oh, yeah, we'll rent this gate out and they can start flights tomorrow. They don't need any government approval. Like the U.S. domestic market is completely deregulated. Outside of essential air service, which is a little of an oddity, there's no regulation within the U.S. domestic air market. Total free market, which I think is good.
Mm-hmm.
But again, with foreign stuff, it's kind of like tariffs. You don't see any tariffs in domestic trading. The state of Wisconsin isn't going to put a tariff on goods coming from the state of Illinois. It doesn't happen.
Yeah.
But you start trading overseas, you get tariffs. And I think it's bad for the most part. But I'm just not comfortable with the wording of this. Like I think it would need to be more specific before I would support that.
I want to come back to that to wrap up with section 2, but just real quick then, because that was actually interesting to me. So with the plane flying from U.S. to India, so they need to get these approvals, but they have to keep flying it, right? Or they lose this and
right.
And now, do they have to pay some kind of fees? Is that based on some kind of favoritism in order for them to get?
It's all like yeah, it's all over the board. It's whatever they need to do to get into that market. Like, I mean, you want to talk about fees in the airline industry? Yeah, I don't have firsthand knowledge of this, but I've heard it's like, one of the reasons you don't see low cost carriers flying from Asia outside of Asia is because if you're going from Asia to either Europe or the Americas, you're going to need to overfly Russia. And Russia charges crazy expensive overflight fees. And local
Wow.
carriers just can't afford them. So, I mean, there's other difficulties to low cost carriers doing a long distance business model, don't get me wrong, but this is just one of the things I heard. It's like even if you want to overfly Siberia, which is critical, going between Asia and North America, you're going to have to pay Russia a pretty penny, I heard, in order to have overfly rights on Siberia.
Well, Russia is its own thing, that's
But
a
but I
whole
mean,
other.
it's just a point of all the favoritism and all the stuff, that you have to go through. When you're flying international, it's definitely not a free and open air market when you're flying international.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of one of the points of this idea is because you are a supporter of Section 1, and these Sections 2 are intended to add a little bit of specificity to what we're talking about in Section 1. So since you supported Section 1, I thought I could also get you on board with Section 2. You're not saying it's specific enough. I think it's a little more specific than Section 1 alone. But yeah, I think maybe that we should have a longer discussion to see what we could add to
See,
Section 2.
because when you write for Section 2, the government shouldn't have any role except those that are necessary for strategic interests of national defense, establishing minimum standards of consumer safety, and especially accounting for externalities. Like, what's an externality? That's
Well, that's a
completely
carbon.
undefined. It's whatever the hell you feel like it is.
No, right. It is, but we do arrive at a consensus with that. So like a carbon tax, that's definitely one of those externalities, the carbon pollution and other kinds of
But see,
pollution.
somebody else could look at that and they could be like, well, an externality is this is going to hurt the oil industry, and the oil industry is critical to self-defense. I mean, they could make that argument and call that an externality as well. See, this is why I'm
Well, see, okay, but if that's the case, then you could potentially subsidize the oil industry. And not that I'm saying that. I think they make plenty of money. I don't think that's the last thing that's one of the subsidies probably we should be looking at removing. But all right, I just wanted to, we could come back to this, but let's keep moving to maybe wrap this up and then get to part
Hey, you
2.
want me to go at you with a point?
What's that?
You want me to go at you with a point?
We're gonna get to your part in a second
Right.
here. Let me wrap up. So Section 3, because I am curious what you think about this, and maybe we can come back to this idea another time. There are various methods through which government can augment market activity for the benefit of the society as a whole, and things that government can do better centrally than citizens can do through free enterprise. However, due to the contentious circumstantial and circumstantial nature of such mechanisms, they will be left unspecified here. So you want to talk about an unspecific idea? I mean, this is opening up,
Well, yeah. I mean, again, I'm going to go back to climate change because in order to get us off of oil, one of the things the government has been heavily subsidizing is things like solar power and renewables. And that's a great example of something that, the government had to push with subsidies. And it's in our interests, in terms of, the best thing we can do to help mitigate climate change is stop pumping carbon in the atmosphere. Well, I don't know about you, but I don't want to go back to living in the Stone Age, which means we need to have energy. And if we don't get our energy from oil, well, now we've got to get our energy from somewhere else. Well, right now, the only non-oil alternatives are nuclear and renewables, like solar, Um, and
the energy storage issue with that. That's,
Well, I mean, yeah, there's definitely issues with that too, but we have no better. I mean, until nuclear fusion comes about, which is still, off in the future, it's not on the immediate horizon. We have no other options. So, the government should absolutely, go ahead and encourage. Like, what I really wish, me personally, is I wish that these traditional energy companies the oil companies and those guys, I wish that they would embrace renewables and they would embrace solar, because as I kind of said earlier in this conversation, instead of instead of clinging on to what doesn't work, companies should transform themselves into tomorrow. And all of these traditional energy companies, they're clinging on to their oil. They're clinging on as much as they can, and they don't want to let go. Instead of clinging on, maybe they should go all in on solar and start leading the change themselves.
No, it's not as profitable. I mean, we have to make it profitable.
Well,
That's
you know
the,
what? Oil's going to be. You know what? What happens is it's not as profitable. But one day nobody's going to use oil anymore, and those companies are going to be worthless because they have no other options.
I think they're going to keep draining that barrel until it's empty, and they're just trying to get every last drop and as much profit as they can. I don't think they don't know what they're doing. I think they do know what they're doing. I think we as citizens need to get our act together better and regulate them, and that's where we use government in order to, well, maybe subsidize certain industries that we do find necessary to our future survival and stability. So yeah, maybe those are the,
Well, I mean, you could even look at something like nuclear fusion. I mean, right now the biggest development in nuclear fusion is the ITER reactor, that they're building in Europe. That's completely being built by government money, because there's no private entity that has that kind of cha-ching or is willing to risk that kind of cha-ching, to go ahead and build the first net energy positive fusion reactor. It's not even supposed to be online until 2030. It's still 10 years from now.
wow.
So,
I want to add here, we do actually have one other Egora user. He's a nuclear scientist from
very
yeah, so and there is an idea about nuclear energy in here. So, and I'm with you on that. I think we need to be going with nuclear uh, fission and fusion. Um, you know, but yeah. So, anyways, maybe you're not ready to embrace this idea. I was hoping that this idea would give a little bit more specificity, because, like I said, you are supporting Section 1. I think this is better developing that. And so we covered some of this stuff, the different issues with government supporting bad, inefficient, businesses and um, certain industries or technologies that
not only
might.
just supporting, it's more like protecting, like the oil industry. I don't feel like the government doesn't subsidize the oil industry, but I definitely think the government protects the oil industry.
Yeah. Well, that's what we were trying to target with this idea. Maybe we can talk about it later. Maybe I can still get you on board. If not, people are watching and deciding. All right, so I'd say this is halftime here. This was quite long, but so all right. This is the halftime point of the show, and in a moment here we're going to switch sides. But I just want to put all of this in context, and especially if somebody just joined us right now, they clicked on this in the middle. You and I are here to discuss some issues and ideas that we care about, and maybe we succeed in coming to an agreement about those, or maybe not. But it's not just up to us. Even if you and I don't persuade each other, we're just two voices, and we have all those other people who can also out there who can also speak out, and they're judging and deciding about what makes the most sense about what we're saying. So, for those of you who are watching, if either of what us is saying resonates with you, please go ahead and support those ideas in the Egora in your ideological profile. We all have the power here. We all share in that power. All right, so round two. Come at me with an idea, Taras.
All right. So one of the things on your profile here that I so your point, your second point, and I agree with parts of this. The problem is I don't agree, with all of it. The most fundamental component of reducing overall violence and suffering in the world is to ensure freedom from captivity for all animals, including humans. To achieve this goal, no one should be allowed to hold captive any other animal, especially to breed them or harm them at a later time. And, you're a vegetarian, I'm not. So me as a meat eater, if I would be supporting this, I'd be hypocritical. Because, obviously, if you think of eating meat, well, those are animals that are bred in captivity that are designed for slaughter. Um, some of the things that I do support is, and also there's other deeper levels to this too. Like you say no animal can be held in captivity. Well, what about pets? I mean, I have cats, for example. Okay, like our cats, we got our cats from the shelter. If those cats wouldn't be rescued, they'd be on the street, and they would have a, yeah, they would be free on the street, but those cats would have a much harder life, on the street than inside my home. Or yeah, you could say the cats are prisoners inside my home, but the cats have a pretty easy, cushy lifestyle inside the house as compared to the life that they would be living on the street. Um, you know, uh, there are certain things, within the meat industry, and it's like, why do I eat meat? I mean, I like it. I like how it tastes, and and I'm not, and I also want to put for the record, I'm not. It's not that I don't like eating vegetarian things, because I mean there are some really good vegetarian foods out there, and I like them, I enjoy them. But sometimes, I want to have a burger, I want to have a steak, and that satisfaction that I get from biting into a nice juicy steak, I can't replicate that satisfaction from vegetarian foods. And and I've tried Beyond Meat, the meatless burger and stuff. And I will say this, I thought that Beyond Meat, it's actually pretty good if you like your burgers well done. I like my burgers rare. So, I mean, it's a really good substitute for a well done burger, but it's not the same taste as, a good rare cut of meat is. Um, and if there was a substitute, like a plant-based substitute that really tasted the same as, the type of meat that I enjoy eating, I would absolutely, eat that plant-based substitute. I mean, and certain things like, there are certain things in the meat industry that are appalling. You hear these stories about, chickens being kept in cages their whole life. Their beaks cut off. They're never allowed to spread their wings. I think that's horrible. And if I need to, actually, I mean, here's a great example. I'm very against animal cruelty. Like, if you're going to kill an animal for meat, you need to quickly, painlessly kill that animal in a humane fashion, so it doesn't suffer. When you keep chickens in cages to where they, their beaks are cut off, they can't spread their wings, that is needless suffering. And, if you want to talk about government regulation earlier, I would be all for the government making a rule that you can't keep chickens like this in cages, and if it costs me a little bit extra to pay for chicken as a result of, letting these chickens, spread out and keeping them in a humane area, I'm fine paying that little bit extra, for chicken meat. But, it's my opinion that as long as, animals are kept in a, humane, comfortable fashion, they're killed in a humane fashion, I don't have a problem eating them.
Well, uh, let's see. So, man, we got so much to talk about here. I don't know. I was looking to make this a half an hour show. We're already at, uh, 33 minutes. Man, it's that first idea. That's a big. The first idea was a really big idea. That took up some time, and actually, that requires quite a bit of investigation. To me, this idea is also a really important. Well, as you can see, it's my really most important practical idea. I'd love to spend a lot of time investigating this issue. I don't know. How are we doing on time?
Well,
How much time do you have?
let's talk about it. Let's talk about it. I'm okay. Let's talk about it.
All right. So, well, so first of all, the question is, what are you trying to do? Because, I'm trying to get, in the first half, I was trying to get you to support my idea. At this point, I don't know if you're trying to get me to not support this idea. You brought it up. I'll be happy to try to get you to support another one of my ideas. You know what I mean?
Well, I'm trying to change your stance so that you acknowledge the meat eaters of the world, and
Okay.
sort of acknowledge and agree with, until there is a substitute. Because again, if you,
Well, okay, all right. Hold on. You said that. So now let me get to your point. So actually, this I want to say that you're completely missing the point of this idea, because this idea is not saying that everyone should be vegetarian. And actually, I don't think that everyone is capable of that, whether that's for physiological or psychological reasons. Some people, well, some people are just psychopaths. Uh, but no, but for some people, maybe I don't know. I'm not a specialist in this, but maybe for some reason they need to continue eating animal products of some sort. Um, but this idea is actually not about animal consumption. This idea is about animal liberation. This is about animal captivity. I think that if somebody wants to eat animals, um, and that are hunted and caught in, well, not caught, but hunted in the wild, they should have the freedom to do that. But that's in the wild. Um, but as far as I'm concerned, the whole idea of keeping people or keeping animals, what kind of the same thing, really. That's my kind of point. The whole idea of that is that you're looking at these sentient beings as property. And anytime that somebody does that, like, how do we get to the point of where we are with factory farms? It all actually started from these farms. Where people were close to their animals and they cared for them until they murdered them mercilessly. So it actually all started out with that. It was a slippery slope that how we got to the horrendous. Well, you can the video is referenced in this idea, so you can watch how animals are being treated right now on factory farms. But it's all in this idea that these sentient beings can be considered property, and if they're property, well, then you do what you want with your property, and it's just a slippery slope to how bad things can get. And so the way I look at it is anyone who actually keeps animals captive is essentially a slaveholder. And I just don't trust slaveholders. There's no such thing as a good slaveholder, or versus a bad slaveholder. You're just a slaveholder, and
So what's your
it's
view on pets then?
so this idea was not really written with pets in mind. Like, actually, if you look at the second link in this idea, that takes you to the Anonymous for the Voiceless kill counter, and you're gonna see. I actually want to pull this up, but we're shooting a video, so it's going to be really small. I really recommend anyone watching that to pull that up. But you're going to see that the numbers of animals that are being murdered for food are so astronomically greater than what's happening to pets that really was not the concern. I think pets will be considered more on the time scale. I think as we focus on eliminating the suffering of animals that are actually being bred to be murdered, as we eliminate that, then we're going to shift our perspective on how we look at pets. Well, first of all, we're going to stop letting people breed pets until slowly, essentially, pets probably mostly go extinct. Like species like dogs and cats will probably eventually simply be phased out. The ones that are alive now, they will be adopted. People will care for them, but slowly and slowly, we're gonna move away from that. But that's not really like that big of a concern. Like, we're talking about the egregious violence and suffering of animals being uh, bred and
Well,
for food.
I would encourage you first off to kind of specify this idea, and with pets, like I disagree with you on the pets thing. Like I love pets, and I would never want to cut pets out of our lives if you love that. And secondly, cats will not go extinct in the wild. Cats breed like bunnies. Um, that's why we have a cat problem. And cats are actually an invasive species in most parts of the world. They have bad effects on the local ecosystems. But I digress. Going back to factory farms and stuff. Um, for our modern society, the way we eat meat, hunting for the meat is not practical. To in terms of the volume of meat that we as a society eat. Um, there are definitely, and I agree with you, there are some horrible practices that happen in factory farms. And, this is one area where I do believe, the government should step in because I am, what rules me is suffering avoidance. Because if I see any sentient creature suffering, then I view that as a problem. Um, the way, chickens in factory farms, those chickens are suffering, and that's problematic. That shouldn't be happening. But, you take an example of, cattle being farmed in a field. When the cattle are in a field, they're not suffering. They're doing what cows do, when they're in a field. And we know when you take the cattle and you quickly and humanely kill them, those cows, they're not suffering. I don't think it's a bad process. You also do have other animals like elephants, for example. Like elephants form complex social groups. And, if you kill one elephant from a social group, it's been shown that the other elephants mourn. And it affects the other elephants. So see, something like that, I would be against, because, you are now causing suffering to the elephants. But if you take our three most, if you take our most common meats, things like, cows, pigs, chickens, turkeys, stuff like that. As long as you farm them in a way that, does not make them suffer, and yeah, would it cost us a couple extra bucks? Yeah, it's going to cost us a couple extra bucks, but I'm fine paying with that. I don't have a problem, having cows on ranches, grazing and fattening up for most of their lives, and then we kill them in a humane way and eat them. I don't think that's a problem.
Well, I don't think there is really such a thing as humane murder. That's just an oxymoron. That does not make any sense to me. Yeah, there was a point I was thinking. It's the whole idea. You said you have a problem with violence and suffering. The whole idea of farming, is humans artificially inflate the supply of life so that they can destroy it. Like humans actually breed, well, rape technically, these animals so that there are more of them, and well, provide them with food so that they keep breeding and growing. So humans create more life just to destroy it. So it's really an inflation, an unnatural inflation of life that we create. So really, simply by eliminating the whole breeding of animals, you would actually drastically reduce the amount of suffering. So I think if that is your concern, then that's really what you should be looking at, is the amount of inflated life that exists just to be destroyed. I think that's how you really strike at the root of the problem.
I would disagree with you there, because it's the food chain. It's we're at the top of the food chain for a reason. Even you look at nature. You can't tell a bear not to kill a deer, for example.
Yeah, I'm not telling you, but again, it's in the wild though.
The bears are wild and they're not inflating the deer population. But the point is, in nature, you find examples of animals killing each other, all the time, and it's survival of the fittest. It's Darwinian evolution. It's survival of the fittest, and we've evolved to be at the top of the food chain. I don't think that breeding cows, for example, like I don't think it's traumatic to the cattle, to go ahead and breed them. And
I think you should investigate that a little bit more, actually, before you make calls about what's traumatic, whether rape is traumatic or not to some animals or not. But sorry.
I've seen videos of cows being bred. They just stand. The videos I've seen of cows being bred, they just stand there and they're eating, and they just stand there and they keep eating through the whole process. So it doesn't look that bad to me.
Okay, you do have a point there. I mean, that's like
they don't stop eating. They don't even stop eating while it's done to them. That's just very traumatic to me.
I think they actually are a bit more cavalier about sex. I mean, let's just put it that way. But but again, as humans, technically we should be looking at that as interspecies. It is. Well, I don't know. let's just say if I started putting my finger in, in a dog's vagina, it would be kind of weird. Anyway, but wait, what was the uh, so the yeah, the bears don't do that, and yeah, you're talking about the food chain, and again, this idea, the point of this idea is not to argue with someone whether they should be vegetarian or not. The point is the whole concept of keeping other animals as property. Uh, I see that as contributing a tremendous amount of suffering.
See, but
Like,
I would agree. You say the point of this is not to, arguing whether to be vegetarian or not, but I disagree with you on that because, see, the way I read this idea is that if you agree with this, like, I don't want to be hypocritical. And if you agree with this and you eat meat, unless you're one of those people that only eats meat that you hunt and kill with your own hands, which I am not one of those people, then I would be hypocritical if I agreed with this idea. And the vast majority of people who eat meat, they don't hunt and kill themselves. They go to the grocery store and they buy themselves a patty of meat, which, was a cow that was on a ranch that was bred for the purpose of raising meat. So if you agree with this, that means that you're against farming, that you're against, us farming animals for food. And if you're against farming animals for food, for over 99% of the population, that means they need to turn vegetarian. So this is promoting vegetarianism to me.
No, you know what? I'm really glad you bring up this point because to me this is a fascinating point because there are people who support this idea who actually still, eat farmed meat. But you know what? I think what's interesting about all this, especially within the context of Egora and the International Logic Party, is that I would actually be fine with people being hypocritical about this. I mean, to me, it's better that somebody supports this idea and still acts, against it than somebody who doesn't support this idea and acts against it. Because the ultimate goal, we're not just writing, I don't know, like little notes about ourselves. These are ideas to be used by the International Logic Party to nominate political candidates and to get them elected. And the way I look at this is this kind of like a fat man in the cookie jar. You have a fat man, he wants to keep eating cookies out of the cookie jar, and he can't stop himself. But he can also hire a personal trainer to tell him stop eating the cookies, get away from the cookie jar, right? So it's kind of like that. Just because your behavior is going in one direction, you could also kind of supersede that behavior by hiring somebody such as a politician who will actually act on a higher principle than maybe.
But I guess you should suppose in your case, you got a fat man who's eating. If we use your analogy, in this case, the fat man, he's eating from the cookie jar. He knows it's bad for him to eat from the. He knows it's bad for him to eat from the cookie jar, and he hires a personal trainer to at least try to nag him to stop. In this case with meat, if I use your analogy, this be like it's a fat man eating from a cookie jar, and it's okay to eat from the cookie jar. See, in my opinion, it's okay to eat farmed animals as long as they're humanely farmed. And the best way, like, see, if this was worded differently, like say, hey, factory farming is okay, but it has to be done in a humane fashion, and we need government regulation in order to make sure that factory farming is done in a humane fashion, even if it increases the cost of meat. That I would absolutely get behind, because I think that there is nothing inherently wrong with doing factory farming in the first place. It just needs to be done in a humane fashion.
Well, I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with anything. I mean, that's my 23-point idea. Listen, we could probably talk about this a lot longer, and I don't know. Maybe we should kind of wrap it up.
I think it's a good point to wrap it up.
Yeah. You want to make some closing thoughts about this, or just that?
No, I mean it's all I'd say is anybody listening to this. Kind of this conversation is the whole point of Egora. Why we're having conversations like these. It's you're listening to this there on YouTube. It's just to get you thinking about different stuff. maybe exposed to some viewpoints, some angles that you haven't thought about before. You don't have to take our opinion. In fact, I encourage you not to take our opinion. I encourage you to formulate your own opinion. Take the information that we've talked about and some things you may have learned and formulate your own opinion. And that's really the point of this.
Well, I will continue to encourage people to support my idea. I mean, we can talk about that at the next meeting and so on. But all right, so that's the second half of our show. Fascinating stuff as always. And again, to our viewers, if any of those ideas speak for you, please support them in the Egora so they can rise up, so more people can see them, and so more people can support them. Taras, thank you very much for joining me today. And thank you for those who joined us watching. Please like and subscribe if you enjoy the show. But hey, if these ideas we discussed today do not represent you well enough, please go ahead and create your own ideas in the Egora. Tell others about those ideas. Come on this Egora Experience show to discuss your ideas with me. Or best yet, if you really want to get the word out, start doing your own Egora Experience program. Thanks again, everyone, and see you in the Egora.
Later.